Hi, my name is Tanisha Das, and today we are going to develop an AngularJS Notepad application. Now, what are we building today? A Notepad application which can view different categories of notes. We are going to create different kinds of notes and display them on the screen. How will we do it? We are going to use an array of objects for different types of notes and display them on the screen using AngularJS custom directives. In the later tutorials, we will create a form for the user to add new notes in the different categories. Validate the form when the user fills it and add the note if the form is validated. What will we use to build it? We are going to use AngularJS, Node.js, Bootstrap icon library. The editor we are going to use is Sublime Text 2. This will be the application layout. So let's see how the application will look once it's developed. So this is my notepad, which has three types of notes: basic notes, to-do lists, and checklists. Checklist will be in the form of where you can check the items and make a note of it done. Now let's walk through the code to see how we have developed AngularJS application. This is my HTML page. We have my AngularJS and libraries added, jQuery and Bootstrap, and this is my main layout. My ng app is at the head of the HTML, which is Notepad. So we have made an Angular module Notepad here. We've already seen how we create a basic application, how we attach controllers, built-in. We have already used built-in directives like ng app and such ng click, etc. So today we are going to see how to make a custom directive. This is the basic annotation of how a custom directive looks like. Now, what are custom directives basically? We know that directives basically are DOM elements that tell AngularJS HTML compiler to add a specific behavior to the DOM element. These are the built-in directives. In similar manner, we are going to make custom directives. Now, much like controllers, directives are also registered on modules. As you can see here, I have attached a directive to my app module. So basically you have to register them on modules. You're going to use the module.directive API. This is the module.directive API which is used. It's a factory function which will return an object. This is an object that is going to be returned with different options to tell the AngularJS compiler how the directive should behave when it is matched with the DOM element. Now there are certain things to keep in mind when making your directive. The first thing is the annotation of how you write the name of the directive. We are basically going to use camel casing while attaching the directive, but in our HTML page we are going to use the dashed format. This is how AngularJS lets you create custom directives. This is the format that is being used. The next we're going to look at is the object that we return from the directive. Now we have different properties that we have to keep in mind while attaching a directive. The first one is the restrict keyword. The restrict keyword basically tells us what kind of directive are you making. We have different kinds of directives that we can make. One is an attribute name that is going to have an A over here instead of the E. That means that you can create this you can create an attribute directive. Basically, like you create a class over here, you will have an attribute which will be the name of your directive. The second one is the element directive that we have created over here. This matches with the tag name. Then we have the class, and then we have comment. By default, if you do not provide the restrict keyword, it takes it as AEC. It takes it as A and E, sorry. Element as well as attribute, both will be defined by default. You can have all kinds of combinations over here. You can have attribute, element, class, and comment, all of them allowed together as well. The next thing that we have over here is the template. Now basically let me also tell you that why do we have these different kinds of directives that we are going to make. Basically HTML allows you to create tags for your directives. Now you are supposed to use tag of a directive, this kind of directive, when you are making a functionality. When you are directives, custom directives are basically used to separate certain portion of your HTML code for reusing purposes. Instead of, now this directive that we have over here has this chunk of HTML code. This HTML code is basically displaying the notes portion over here, this much portion on the screen, just the notes portion. We have a different template for to do, and a checklist is being directly displayed in our HTML. So this is my first template which displays the notes section. This is the second template which displays the to do section. And we can also have directly in the main HTML, so I've kept checklist over here for demonstration purposes. So basically this HTML structure can be reused without having to write the whole chunk of code again and again. We can do that using just this single line of directive. So element directives are basically used when you want to define a particular structure of HTML code, say a particular functionality. Now I have segregated the nodes category as a different template. You can also have a particular behavior. When you have a particular behavior, you can use the attribute directive. Say for example, you have say a page which displays certain information, and you want certain HTML code to be inserted only when a particular behavior is met. In that case, we use attribute directives. Comment and class directives are, as the name describes, comment directives are used very less because their AngularJS takes a little more time to process it. And class directives again are going to be used to add a particular behavior to your element tags, but it's going to be more general than your attribute directives. In a similar way how we use in CSS. So as you can see, my nodes template has this chunk of code wherein I have used an ng or repeat directive to display the different nodes in my panel. The title and the description over here, and I have a button which will help me add an element which will be covered in the next tutorial. So as I was describing, there are different attributes which we can pass in the return object of the custom directive. One is the template URL. Now the template URL is basically a link, similar way how ng include works, template URL works in a similar manner. It's just going to go and find this HTML page and just replace this chunk of code in your HTML template where you have defined your directive. It's just going to replace that code over there. So basically your scope of this controller will also be applicable to your directive. So now I have defined a array over here in my controller, which is scope.to-do-list, scope.notes. Here is the content that we are going to use. This is the object which is basically displaying the properties of my notes, right? The title, the description, etc. So this is basically created in my controller, and that controller's objects are accessed in my directives template over here. So that's what I'm trying to explain over here, is that the scope of your controller is basically carry forwarded to your directive. Whatever variables, whatever functions you define in your controller are accessible from your directive as well. So in that is the reason our notes, title and description are getting accessed in from the directive also. Now that is how your template works. Now there is another option to template URL. You can directly have a template over here instead of linking it to a different HTML page. Say for example, you just want a small heading to be displayed. You don't have much of an HTML code, but you want to use that heading in different places. You want to keep it as a separate HTML structure. So you can define a directive which will have your template directly over here instead of a template URL. Now I'll tell you where I have used this directive. This is the title custom directive. In my HTML page, I have used it. I have used it to basically display the title over here. So as you can see on the screen, this title that you are seeing here is coming from my directive. So similar manner, you can use the directive to show this all these three titles, and you will not have to write the same HTML code again. So this is the difference between your template and template URL. And the next thing that we also have is in a directive is a link function. Now how we have a controller function, which the way we have a controller, which is a function which is called from your HTML DOM structure. Similarly, your directive also has a function which is called every time you invoke a directive. This is the function that is called. So any extra functionality that you want to add, or any extra behavior that you want to add to your directive, can be written in this function. So suppose if I wanted to have a different say caller functions in my directive, like when I click on any of the objects in my directive, say I have a button over here in this template, and when I click on that button, a function should be called. Now I can define this function in my directive itself because it is part of the directive, so there is no need to write it in the controller and then call it from there. So you can have all the functionality of a directive clubbed together in the directive custom directive that you have made. You need not write your function in the controller and then access it in the directive. You can write it in the link function. So these are the basic attributes that we use in a custom directive. I also have another directive formed over here which has another attribute called scope. Now before seeing why scope is used, let me tell you now that this directive is accessing the controller notepad controller, which is defined in my body. Now suppose if I want to use the same directive again, but for now I don't want my notes array to be used. Like for example, my control over here, my directive over here is using the note array and displaying the information which is defined in notepad controller. But now I don't want my directive to display this content of the notes. I wanted to display another array of objects. I wanted to display say to-do list. So how do I do that? Either I have to create a different controller and then attach my directive inside that controller and access the object, which is a tedious task. So directive, basically your custom directive gives you an option wherein you do not have to create another controller in order to pass a different set of information that your directive wants to display. So how do we do that? We do that by isolated scope. This scope is basically called an isolated scope, wherein your controller will pass a certain set of information to your directive only. Not everything that you define in the controller will be accessible to your directive. And using this scope, whatever information is passed to your directive can be used inside the HTML structure of your directive to display the information. Now what I have done here in the to-do list custom directive is I have used isolated scope. Now what it does here is it creates an object basically, and this object will take information from your controller. So in this object, whatever you define is what is going to be available in the directive only. Now let us see how we have done it from the HTML. This is my directive, the syntax of my directive. It's exactly same as the notes directive that we just saw. In addition to that, it has an info attribute over here. Now as you saw, this is the info attribute which will take to-do list from the controller. This object is defined in the controller. So now what happens is both notes and to-do list is not passed to my to-do list directive. Only the information that we have provided, that is the to-do list directive, is passed from my controller to my directive, which is over here, defined over here. So this info object is picked up by my isolated scope object customer info. Now my customer info now has only an array of object, that is this to-do list. And in my directive template, how am I going to show this information is using the customer info object. Now how is this different from the notes directive? In the notes directive, we directly access the notes array that we had created in the controller. So I hope you can see the difference, that we have segregated, or you can say isolated, the information that is passed from the controller to the directive. So now I don't need to access the controller object directly. In my to-do list, how I have accessed the directive object. In similar manner, now if I want to have another to-do custom directive showing different set of information, not the array that or to-do list, not the information that is defined in the to-do list array, I can simply create another object, say checklist, which will have different set of information, pass this checklist object to my info over here, and my directive will then refer to that object and display the information. So this is what basically my isolated scope does. So as you saw, custom directive basically gives us many other features to be used, and there are more advanced features that comes with custom directives, wherein you can match it with different DOM structures and have multiple directives defined within each other. Now your link function, let me give you a little more information about your link function. The link function basically has certain attributes that you can pass to it. One is the scope, which is going to create an AngularJS scope within your link function. Element is the jQuery element that the directive matches to the DOM element. ATTRS, that is attributes, it's a hash object with key value pairs for normalizing attribute names and their corresponding attribute values. Controller will be the directive's required controller instance or its own controller if any. The exact value depends on the directive's required property. Like for example, if you have an element over here, according to that you will have your controller passed to your link function. We have many more other dependencies that you can add to your link function. All the AngularJS services that you have can basically be attached to your link function, like interval, timeout, all the built-in directives that you have, or if you create your own service also, it can be injected into this link function of your directive. So this was a basic overview of how we create a custom directive. Let us again just have a look through the code of how we have developed this application. We have a controller which has our objects, notes, to-do list and checklist. We have a directive for my notes panel. We have a custom directive for my to-do panel. And we have a custom directive for displaying just the title in my checklist panel. This is my notes template, which basically displays the DOM structure on my browser page. This is my to-do template, which takes the isolated scope and displays the to-do list panel, where we are using an ng repeat built-in directive. And we have this is my main HTML page, my index page, which has my directives defined inside my panel body, and my checklist panel is directly given in this HTML page itself. So it's not mandatory to use directives. I mean, you can have a combination of directives and normal HTML structure in the same page. So in the next tutorial, we are going to see how we can add new notes into this structure of notes that we have over here. We will be using a common function that will be defined in our controller, and using the help of our custom directives and our built-in directives, we will add more of these. We will give functionality to the user to provide different nodes in whatever category you need. So this is how we have used a basic custom directive of AngularJS. So we have learned how to create custom directives. What are custom directives? What are isolated scopes in directives? What are templates? What are template URLs that we provide in custom directives? Why do we use custom directives? How does it help us in reusing code? And how it helps us keep the code even cleaner. Like you can have functionality of code segregated in different HTML structures, so it's very maintainable, testable, and easy to understand. So in our next upcoming tutorials or videos of AngularJS, we can also look into different other concepts like building our own custom filters. We have seen a few built-in filters like order by, group by, the date filter. So we're gonna see how to create more of our own filters. How can we inject dependencies? How can we build services? Why are services used? What are AngularJS built-in services? What are factory methods? How do we create factory methods? AngularJS routing and many such advanced features. So that's all for this tutorial. Thank you.